Today I want to take you to Psalm 78. The reference there, if you look in your Bible, says that it is a maskil of Asaph. Maskil is simply a musical term, and the understanding was this entire psalm, a maskil, was sung. Now we don't know what the tune is or was, but the reality is the folks then did. Someone would only have to say, let's sing Psalm 78, and off they would go singing a tune that was very, very familiar to them. This particular psalm encourages the Hebrew people to obey God, to learn the lessons from the past, recount them, and follow after them, even learning from mistakes so that they don't make the same ones. When God makes his law clear, he also outlines blessing and curses. If you do this, things will go well with you. If you do not do these things, things will not go well for you. Remember what God has said, the psalmist is saying here. Remember the disaster that came with disobedience, the psalmist is saying. Remember the disaster so that you don't have to learn the lesson for yourself. Some folks learn the hard way. What we mean by that is they don't learn from other people's mistakes. They have to make the same mistakes themselves in order to learn the lessons that they could have learned simply by watching someone else. If I were to give a title to this psalm, it would probably be, Don't Be Like That. Well, after Asaph spends several verses in the beginning of the psalm telling the folks that God has lessons, that he has taught them from things that have taken place in the past, we come to my favorite verse in this psalm, Psalm 78, verse 9. Easy reference to remember, 789. Psalm 78 and verse 9. This is what he writes. The men of Ephraim, though armed with bows, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, and they refused to live by his law. They forgot what he had done, the wonders that he had shown them. The men of Ephraim were one of the 12 tribes of Israel. Ephraim was one of the sons of Joseph, and therefore one of the tribes. As one of the tribes of Jacob, they were under God's covenant blessing. They knew that God would be with them and that he would be their God. They would have known what God expected of them. They would have known what God did for them. They would have known how he miraculously gave Abraham and Sarah a child in their old age. They would have known God had miraculously released the people from Egypt after they had been bondage for years. They would have known of God's miraculous provision of manna while they wandered in the desert for 40 years. They would have known how God gave them the land of Canaan by causing the walls of Jericho to fall simply because of the blast of the trumpet. They had everything they needed. They were armed with bows. God had fought the battle for them in the past. God promised that he would fight the battle for them in the future. They had what they needed. And yet the text says they ran. They ran because they forgot what the Lord had done. Don't be like that. That's what he's saying. In Psalm 78, Asaph continues to record everything that God had done for his people in the past. Story after story, God's rescue, God's provision. Tell the story. Sing the story. Tell it to your children. Remember the story. Remember the men of Ephraim who were armed. They had everything they needed. They could have stood strong. They were secure. And what did they do? They turned back. Don't be like that, the psalmist is saying. Now you and I who have committed ourselves to Jesus are armed with the same bow. We have the same history. In fact, we have what they had. We're armed with the knowledge of the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead and the promise that he has overcome. And because he has overcome, we are overcomers. We are more than conquerors, Paul writes in Romans chapter 8. 2 Peter 1 and verse 3 says, his divine power has given to us everything we need for life and godliness. No matter what. His divine power has given to us everything we need. You are armed with a bow. Remember what he has done. Don't be like Ephraim and turn back in the day of battle. Remember, remember, remember. Remember God. Remember the disaster that comes when you don't remember God. And remember God. Os Guinness, in his book God in the Dark, writes this: "The Christian faith turns carefully on the boundary between present and past. Faith is thoroughly existential, but the believer's moment-by-moment experience is never autonomous, nor is it adrift in time. For memory serves to link faith to the past. Faith is reflective. Mere memories are never allowed to become nostalgia or remorse. They are foundational to the faith that we are called to have and embrace and live, particularly in the day of battle." These are the lessons from Psalm 78:9. Though armed for battle, they turned back. Don't be like that. Remember that as a follower of Jesus Christ, you and I have a history with God. You know what he has promised. You know what he expects. You know what he has done. You and I have a bow. Use it. Don't be like that. Psalm 78:9, a maskell of Asaph. Amen.